Hey guys, welcome. This is my Wargaming Statistics and Probability course. I'm going to go ahead and break this guy up into three different pieces for everybody. This is a study in applied statistics and probability as it applies to wargaming and specifically to conquest. I kick off with just a quote. It's my quote, and it says, "In any wargame that utilizes dice, there is a probability engine running off of mathematics that can be used to devise better tactics and strategies." So that's really the center of this course and what I plan on achieving with this course. And the first question that comes to mind is, why am I doing this? What's the point of this? So I've been doing battle reports. I've got two, as of today, two conquest battle reports set up. And one thing that I've noticed that I've complained about many years in the past is that battle reports really just show you a game being played, but no one really ever talks about the things that happen during those battles. So we don't ever really have any analysis or what you could have done better or why did that player choose to do those things, that kind of thing. And I'm very interested in that perspective. And so I wanted to do a tactical analysis of the battle reports that I do. However, I realized that if I just kick off into a tactical analysis of a battle report that I did, I'm going to be using some language and showing some numbers that you may not be familiar with or you have no idea where those come from. So that's the point of this series. So this series that I'm pushing out here is a three-part series. The first part is this video. We're going to go over statistics and probability in general, and these are just general language pieces that I am going to use as it relates to wargaming. The next video, part two, we're going to talk about turning tangibles into probabilities. And what that means is I'm going to be taking actual statistics on models, like their scores, and we're going to turn them into numbers that we can work with to calculate probabilities and odds and understand where I'm coming from there. And the last section is going to be my first tactical analysis of the last report I did. And if you're interested in seeing that, there should be a link below. That should take you to that battle report. And I'm going to kind of take that apart and just go over the battle, what could have been done differently, as well as how I came to the conclusions I came to. So my target audience here is really people who want to know how or why people make the decisions that they do in gaming, specifically in wargaming, more specifically in the game Conquest. These can be applied to any war games, and in fact, I have applied these through many war games in 25 years that I've been doing war games. So I find that most competitive players and tournament players that do really well all have a version of what I'm about to show you squirreled away at home. They have their own system. This is my system, and my system is done a lot of good for me. It's not perfect by any means, and I'm always learning and improving on it. But my target audience for this are the people who want to know why these choices get made and how to better improve their play by understanding the math of the game. It's not for everybody. I understand that this topic can get heated in many different places over many different years. A lot of people don't like the math hammer portion for a lot of reasons, and that's fine. That's not my target audience. So I just wanted to go over math hammer versus the rule of cool. So here we have a slide. We've got two people bickering. This is what I'm trying to avoid, and I'm just setting the expectations in the beginning. Competitive gaming versus narrative gaming. Math hammer or statistics of probability actually can be applied to both of these situations. I'm a huge narrative gaming nerd. I have run narrative game events for the better part of a decade. Starting in 2010, I got off the competitive wagon around that time period, and I switched over to story-based games. I like to tell stories with my games. I understand both sides of the fence, right? But you can use statistics in either of those environments, because in competitive gaming you're gonna use that to tune your lists and make them really powerful, and in narrative gaming you can use statistics to go, maybe I've made this a little too strong for a casual night. As I said, statistics and probability are useful in either. Neither are wrong or bad. That's important. Neither way of approaching a game is incorrect, because a game ultimately is used to entertain you, right? And it's a social thing, and you and your opponent should be entertained and enjoying each other's company and having fun. So neither way of having fun is wrong. Not mutually exclusive to fun, not mutually exclusive to each other. I think I already pointed that out, so I don't need to hammer on that. So moving on to what I call the pillars of wargaming. I've had many conversations about this, and there are different approaches to this topic. These are how I see things, again, and how I see things don't necessarily reflect everybody in the world, but this is how I see things. These are the three stands of wargaming. The first important piece is your army list. And of course, as we know, the army list is the composition of all the forces in your army. This guy is driven by statistics and probabilities. Every time you pick something, you pay points for it, and it gives you a set of abilities. A lot of those abilities are based off of math. So using stats, you can make your army list really powerful by choosing the things that are most cost efficient. You're getting the most bang for your buck. We have things called tangible statistics. Tangible statistics are values that won't change, and they're not determined by things that you cannot predict. So an example in Conquest, movement values are always the same. Clash values are always the same. So when I buy a unit of men-at-arms, their clash value is always a 2. Intangible statistics. These are the little tricky guys. The intangible statistics are abilities that are abstract, and you can't really put a math value on it. So some examples of an intangible statistic or an intangible ability might be the ability to heal units, because you don't know if you're even going to be able to get to heal the units. You don't know what you're going to heal. You could heal a couple of things that aren't really high value. You could heal a bunch of things that are a lot of high value. In that case, there's no real way to put a math probability on it, because in every game it could be different. Those are intangibles. The second pillar we have is player skill. And this is quite simply how good you are at playing the game. Player skill is broken down into several facets. Number one, your knowledge of the rules. If you don't know all the rules, you're going to get caught unaware during a game. You're not going to know how to plan appropriately. If you don't know the rules of engagement in the war, you can't fight it. Target priority. Knowing which targets to go after first and which targets to try to ignore. Risk management and calculated risk. Every game is different in this regards. I happen to like games that have a lot of risk management because it emulates a real battlefield. A lot more than a game where there's hardly any risk management or everything's a reward. And I'm not going to get into what those games are, but in Conquest there is a risk management and calculated risk scenario that you have to figure out. Your positioning of your units becomes a part of player skill. You could have the most powerful army list ever, but if you go through and you don't position them correctly, you're going to have a bad time. Know when to be aggressive and when to be reserved. There's a time and place for both. If you're always one or the other, you're not going to do so well. Know when to sacrifice units, just like in chess. Pawns are meant to be sacrificed, but sometimes you have to sacrifice your knights. Sometimes you have to sacrifice your queen for the greater good. Know when to set traps and know what a trap looks like so you don't fall into one yourself. There's also random factors that come into the game. That's the third pillar. That's the dice and the random probability, and in Conquest that could be your secondary objectives. Now, what that means is all three of these things come together to play a role in the outcome of your game. And ultimately, it's like a triangle, right? So if both players have the same skill and both players have even rolls of dice, then you could say that the game kind of relies on army lists, or that's going to play a bigger role. If both players are using equally powerful army lists and the random factors are the same, the dice are even, then it comes down to player skill. The player who's the better player is going to win. And if both army lists are the same and the player skill is the same, then you're looking for who's going to make the first mistake and who's going to have worse luck than the other. So all three of those pillars come together to form the outcome of a game. And statistics and probability usually hinge on the army list portion and help feed into player skill and also into the random factors by knowing how to minimize those. All right, so then we go into roles and terminology on the battlefield. And this is going to play more of a role in the third part of the series because this is where I actually use these. I'm just going to go over them real quickly and just to say what they are and what they mean to me. Again, this is my system. These are what these things mean to me. When I look out on a battlefield, I identify what your king unit is, and I know what my king unit is. And these come off of chess. So the king unit is a unit that if I tear out of your army, you are going to have a very hard time recovering from that. And vice versa. If you take out my king unit, I'm going to be at a severe disadvantage. The queen unit is the secondary unit. It's my secondary target. If I can remove that as well, and you haven't removed my king or queen unit, or just one of them, and I've removed both of yours, I'm going to be at a sizable advantage. I call that the royal pair. And sometimes a king or queen unit may not be just one unit. It may be a pair of units that is the queen, for example. And a good player is going to try to make it so that there's not just one unit in their army that you have to take out. You're going to want to have to take out several armies through redundancy, what people call spam. That's where that comes from. Hammer units are offensive units. They're units whose main role is to cause damage. Anvil units are defensive units. Their main purpose is to take damage and hold objectives. It is possible for a unit to be both a hammer and an anvil, and in fact you'll find that roles can be fluid during a battle. They can go back and forth. Flanker or blitzer. This is a new one that I picked up off of some conversations I've had recently, but they made a lot of sense to me, so I added them to the slide. A flanker unit is a speed unit, and its job is to move around the battlefield quickly and try to get into a favorable position through a flank or a rear charge. Flankers are usually going to be light units that are they can't take a lot of punishment usually, but if you ignore them, it's going to bite you literally, because they're going to move into a position that's going to pincer you, and you have to deal with those. Support units are just your basic generic units. They're not really strong enough to be hammers. They can't really take a lot of damage to be anvils. They're there to support another unit on the battlefield. Men-at-Arms, for example, would be an example of something I call support unit, unless you have that thing jacked up to like 7 or 8 stands, in which case it becomes an anvil. And then finally we have the chaff. I call these trash. I know, not supposed to use that word because it has negative connotations. That's why I have chaff there. Trash may slip and come out of my mouth because I've used that term for a very long time. These are your units that are expendable. These are your pawns. These are, for example, force-grown drones or militia. These are units that you push out there to form screens, and they are there to die. I know that's merciless, but it's war. So statistics and probability. What is this giving to us exactly? What is the advantages of using this? Why do I care about any of this? Well, I have a little preface here. And this is very important because this is going to lead into something where I hear why statistics can't be used in wargaming or any games. But, and there's some truth to this, on December 29th, I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, so hey, here's some Miami Dolphins trivia. On December 29th, 2019, which was a couple months ago as of the recording of this video, they went to Boston to face the New England Patriots. And Miami was predicted to get their butt kicked. They're going into New England, who's a very strong Super Bowl contender team. And Miami is, well, they're a chaff team. They're there to lose and to be sacrificed for TV, I suppose. I don't know what they are, really, to be honest. It's been a very rough 20-odd years of being a Miami Dolphins fan. However, they had an 8-to-1 odd against them. So 12.5% chance of victory. Now, key thing. 12.5% chance of victory is not 100% chance of loss. It means a very, very tiny chance that they're going to pull it out. But they could pull it out. And in fact, on that day, they did pull it off. So statistics and probability do not ever tell you 100% that this is going to happen. What it does tell you is it says this is going to be this difficult. This is going to be how difficult these teams are going to have it and what they have to do to try to win. So some bullet points of what statistics and probability mean to me. Number one, it's a guide to help give your force the edge in the mathematics of the game. If I know what the statistics are of my units in terms of probability and you don't, I have an advantage in the game because I know where to match my units up and you won't. Number two, it helps identify the strengths and weaknesses of your force and your opponent. If I know all the scores of my units, I know who's strong and who's weak, and I know how to circumvent that. And if you don't know those things, you're going to be at a mismatch nearly every time, and that can be frustrating. Number three, helps you create short-term tactics to take advantage of probability mismatches. Number four, will help you devise long-term strategies based off of probability mismatches. Note the difference between the word tactic and strategy. In military terms, a tactic is a short-term decision. If I have to make a choice, that is a tactic, whereas a strategy is a long-term plan. I need to have good tactics that lead to good and that feed into good strategies. Number five is an indicator of difficulty for both players before battle. If I'm going into a battle and I know that my force only scores 150 points on my little register, and I'm playing someone who scores 190 points on their register, I know that the game is going to be challenging for me. And my opponent is not going to have to work as hard, and he can afford to make more mistakes than I can. That doesn't mean he's going to win. It means that I'm going into this knowing the difficulty of this game, and it's going to be a little bit more challenging. And we talked, number six, is not a guarantee of success or failure. I felt that was so important that I made a slide just for that. Because this is the number one thing that I hear on why you can't rely on math, because sometimes you're going to roll dice bad. Yes, sometimes you're going to roll dice bad. That doesn't mean, however, that I'm going to ignore probability. If I know that a unit has a 9 in 10 chance of destroying yours and taking the center of the field and winning, I am not going to bank on the 1 in 10 chance that they're going to fail and not charge you. I'm going to use that information to make a better informed decision that the odds are strongly in my favor to charge. For example, that doesn't mean I'm not going to roll a bunch of fails, because it happens to all of us, and the dice don't care. And that's true. I agree with that. But that doesn't mean that statistics and probability are useless. It's also, again, number two, does not mean that just because Army A scores higher than Army B, that Army A will always win, or that the score is going to be close or not close. That doesn't tell me anything. Those probabilities don't tell me who's going to win and by how much at all. So this slide, very important, is not a guarantee of success or failure, is not a predictor of score, is not a predictor of degree of success or failure. None of these things point to those tangible, solid, constant values at all. So those are not a counter argument to why statistics and probability can't be used. Because I know that those things are true. All right. So I've used the word tangible versus intangible, so I'm just going to kind of go over those. Tangible characteristics, again, are solid things that we can derive a mathematical equation off of. They are constants that should not change and can be predicted. For example, gravity is a tangible asset. We know that it's going to be there. They have deterministic probabilities. They have a real form. Their value can be easily determined. I have a clash value of 2. That means I have a clash value of 2. It doesn't mean I have a clash value of 4 sometimes, or 3 sometimes, or 0 sometimes. It means I have a clash value of 2 in Conquest. An intangible characteristic are abstract items. They do not have a real form. They are buffs. They are synergies. They are situational environmental things. They are things such as secondary objectives where you may not know what those are going to be in a scenario. Their value is harder to determine because of that. You cannot bake those into formulas, not with any real form of confidence. What some people will do, and what I also have done, is you can do trials and you can get what are expected values off of intangibles that, based off of observation, you've observed that the majority of the time they do these things, and that I think is fine. But their value is still harder to determine. A clash value of 2 stays a clash value of 2. a power that's situational on you being 18 inches away from me at a certain angle, you can't predict that. You can try to force that to happen, but I can try to counterplay that. Its usefulness is dependent upon battlefield conditions and player skill in its use. So I might have, and you hear this a lot, that model is not that good because this skill is useless. I can't get it to work right. And someone else will say, what are you talking about? That model's broken. It's overpowered because that skill is so broken, my opponent always beats me all the time with it. It's dependent on player skill and how it's used. When I had to do the Azir comp for Age of Sigmar, that was a story that I often will tell, is as we were balancing the items or the units, this is one of the skink units in the Lizardmen. On the same exact day, I had a playtester say, these points are too low because these skink chameleons are too powerful, and someone else like an hour later sent me a report saying, these things are way over cost, they're not very good, they need to come down. So again, intangibles, it's dependent on player skill, which is why I always usually say, show me the battle report. Show me how it was used. All right, unit potential. So crossbows are here because I'm going to actually be breaking those down in the next video. But looking at unit potential, this is getting into my statistics. Now this is getting into my numbers, which we'll go over in the next video. My unit potential is the sum of its tangible statistics, which is what I call its output score, plus its intangible potentials, which is everything it could do, but you can't math very well. Statistics and probabilities will make up the output score. So we know clash value 2. We know it costs 100 points or whatever they cost. Based off of that, you can get an output score. You know its defense. You know how much damage it can, on an average, take before it's gone. You can use all of that to get a baseline score for quite a bit of things, and to get a feel for what it should be doing in any given game. And I give an example here on the slide. A unit that has a clash score of 3 and 24 attacks will on average hit their opponent 12 times. This can be used as a gauge to determine a unit's usefulness in melee. It is objectively better than a unit with a clash value of 2 that only has 12 attacks, which on average hit only 4 times. So I'm using those statistics to say objectively, these two things do not measure, this thing is better than this thing. Abstract potential usage in an optimal environment makes up the intangible potentials. And what does that mean? An optimal environment. What I try to do if I'm gauging intangibles is simply go, in the best case scenario with a player who knows what he's doing, this is what I can achieve. And I use that as the baseline across the board. So if a player is not as good and doesn't use the unit to its full potential, all the units across the board are still gauged based off of a full potential scenario. So here is an example: a hero stand that can heal may never get the chance to heal, or it may get a chance to heal but only cheap chafe units, or it may get a chance to heal expensive elite units. Depending on what it does in the game determines how useful it was in that game. It could be not very useful at all, or it could be very useful. It could be a game turner. Intangible abilities must be felt and intuitively discovered and utilized because they're difficult to really put a number on. This is also where the source of most of your arguments will come from. Here's a football example. Because I used to play football, I understand statistics are used in football and in probability calculation of teams. A player's tangible would be his 40-yard sprint, his bench press, and how high he can jump. Those tell you about how athletic he is. Those don't tell you how good of a football player he is, right? The intangibles, their ability to recognize defensive coverages, their ability to throw or catch a ball under pressure, things such as that nature. You can't math those out. And because you can't math those out, those are things you have to find on your own through exploration. Because a super athletic player who can't catch a ball and can't read a defense is not going to be as good as someone who maybe not be as athletic but can do those things, those other intangible things in spades. He's going to be a better football player. Intangibles and random chance are often the source of dismissal of statistics and probability. This kind of plays in. I've already gone over this. I don't really think I need to spend too much more time on this. This is just giving some counter arguments to why statistics are useless in games. And this is just to give my opinion on why I don't believe those things are true at all. And I said a lot of these I've already gone over, so I'm not going to go over them again. You can kind of check out this slide here. The intangibles are part of the equation. How are the units being used when someone says, well, your stats are wrong? Your stats say this is super powerful, but I keep losing. So your stats must be wrong, because if the stats were say that I was powerful, I should always be winning. Common counter argument. Watch those people play a game sometime, and that's usually where you see why they lose all the time. In that example, I'm not saying everyone's like that, but often when I watch someone play after they've complained that statistics are lying to them, I see where a lot of the problems lie. It's through poor choices during the game. Because again, these aren't a predictor of ultimate outcome. So here we have a football player with poor speed and poor strength, but great football intangibles is still a poor football player, because their base statistics indicate they will be overpowered on the field. So that goes both ways. I gave the example of not as athletic, but great intangibles, still good. In this case, poor tangibles, great intangibles, still a poor football player, because a 150-pound guy who can read defense is great. That's wonderful until he gets blasted for the first time. And then he's not a football player anymore. However, that player may make a great coach, which is another role on the football team. So that's where using both tangible stats and intangible stats determine the usefulness of your units on a battlefield, just as they can determine the usefulness of a person on a football field. All right, so we're heading up towards the end. We got a few more slides here in this one. So thank you for sticking with me. Unit efficiency. Unit efficiency means I'm really strong or really weak or whatever, but I paid this many points to be that. A weaker unit is not necessarily a bad thing. If its unit efficiency is high, that means you're not really paying as many points to get the output out of it. Conversely, just because a unit has a really high output score doesn't mean that it's a good unit to take. So if I have a unit that is expected to do 12 damage every turn, which wipes out a whole unit every turn, but costs 800 points, everyone watching this would say, that is a bad investment. Why would I pay 800 points? You've already done some math in your head to say the unit efficiency on that unit, while it sounds great that it's removing a unit, is way too much. I'm paying way too many points for that. That's bad performance. Even though it does really great on the field, I can't get anything else. That is unit efficiency, and that is one of the scores I keep. The more points that must be spent to achieve output, the less desirable the unit, regardless of how high its potential output is. Intangibles must be woven into the base efficiency score, which is difficult due to its abstract nature. This is where performance, again, suffers just like output score. You have to know where are the intangibles. So if the numbers come back and say, well, dude, you know, this unit, you pay a little too many points for what it does. Oh, but by the way, it has these two intangible rules that sometimes are really cool. You have to make a judgment call. Is that worth it to me to pay those extra points? Tuning lists, you'll hear this a lot. Tuning lists is basically saying I want to maximize my output score. I want to go into an event and I want to maximize the overall baseline mathematics of my list. I want to make it as finely tuned and powerful as I can. So I know a lot of us have heard this already, that term, tuning. This right here is a linear regression chart that I have used on all of the units in the game so far. And this is just to demonstrate by the output score on the bottom versus the point cost. And what it should be is, if I pay 10 points, I should get around 10 output or whatever. Things like that go up in a linear fashion. Well, in games, that's not always the case. And as you can see here, there are things that are going to overachieve, and there are things that are going to underachieve. And when you're tuning a list, what people are looking for are those units below that line, because below that line means that they're getting pretty good output and they're not paying as many points for it compared to everything else in the game. So, for example, there's militia. They're really weak, but also don't pay a lot of points. You can see that they're very far under that line for what they do. Another one, on the far right there, you can see Vanguard clone infiltrators. Those guys have a ridiculous amount of output that they can push out in damage. And they also don't pay a lot of points for it compared to what they should if you're using the linear regression model on all of the units in the game. So that is a highly efficient unit and a highly deadly unit, which means my prediction is you're going to see that unit pretty much in every competitive list. That's what tuning lists means. And if you understand probabilities and statistics, you're going to have your own version of this, and you're going to be able to see these things are good, these things are okay, and these things here are bad. Also, that is where a source of a lot of arguments come, because that can make lists start to look the same, which is it's true, and that's pretty much the nature of the beast, unfortunately. There's a time and place for everything. Right place, right time. In a competitive tournament environment, where one is trying to compete for a high ranking, tuning is, I say almost here, but I'm going to say here, pretty much always mandatory. If you're not tuning your list, you're going in at a disadvantage. And that's if you're going into the tournament with the intention of competing with other players. In a more casual environment or a narrative environment, going all out with your list tuning is usually is bad form, and it's going to generate a lot of negative play experiences. So if you're well versed enough to understand the statistics of the game, you'll be able to also understand when you need to tune down, and you can use these numbers to help get to a value that's a little bit more appropriate for the environment you're in. Rolling up last, applied usage. This is just showing you right here. You can get the overall score of your list to determine your baseline list strength. I use this all the time. This will tell me the difficulty level of the game I'm about to have, or how easy this game is going to be. I used to also use a form of this as comp in Age of Sigmar campaigns, where people would submit their list and I could calculate their score and ask them to tune things down. Because when I just say, please tune this down, the answer is, well, how much should I tune it down? I don't know what that means. Why do I have to do that? This actually gives a value that they can look at. Most of the games I find fall into either challenging or easy. Very few lists are balanced against each other, and most lists are not going to be extremely hard or extremely trivial. So I would say the majority of your values are going to fall as in challenging or easy, which means one player is going to have to really think about what they're doing and not make a lot of mistakes, and the other one's going to have some leeway to make some mistakes and play sloppy, and they're going to have a more powerful list to lean on. Games that fall into the extremely hard category, the red category there, are often seen as a negative play experience that will run people off. Keep that in mind if you're trying to build your community, guys. If you're running super hard lists all the time, you're not going to be appealing to a lot of people. Additionally, knowing your audience, some people also think challenging games are negative play experience as well. If you are an event organizer or you're trying to organize a conquest community, you have to keep all of those things in mind. To build up a community, because people like different things. So in this example, I have a list that's 165 output versus a 192 output total, which is this is important because this was actually about the scores of the army of the battle report I posted, my second one. They fell about here. So and I would say that felt true. It was a more challenging game for me, because I couldn't make as many mistakes. I didn't have as many powerful units, but in no way, shape, or form was I out of the game ever. In fact, I was winning for a turn. It's just that the dice landed how they did, and I made a lot of mistakes in that game, and that cost me. So in this case, like a 27-point difference, is that bad? Honestly, at this point, I don't know in Conquest what when the lists get what category they fall in based off their numbers. I can tell you from other games that I found that 27 points or so in a game where list building is key and crucial like Age of Sigmar, that is a very significant difference. But in a game like Conquest, which is alternate activation, and I think that you have a lot more interaction and the ability to counterplay better, because you're not just standing there for the whole turn watching them come at you, or in the case of Age of Sigmar, 2 whole turns if you get double turn. I think that plays a key, and the army lists aren't as important. So those numbers, I think, can be a little bit more offset without it getting too gross. Also applied usage to gauge potential mismatches in the battle line. So looks like this is an example of the battle that we were going to go over. And I just broken all the shapes down, and you can see their offense and defensive values. And this kind of helps you, if you know these things in your head, then you know where to match up on, right? And these lines here show the range superiority. So crossbow units got 20 inches, marksmen have 28 inches. So we see that the Spire force in this example has range superiority as well, which means not only do they have a stronger army, they have range superiority, which means that the 100 Kingdoms player has to be aggressive the whole time, because if the person does not have range superiority, that means they're getting shot at. And if they just stand there and try to play defensive, they're just going to keep losing guys. So they're going to have to be somewhat aggressive to counteract that. Range support is a huge thing, and we'll talk about that in a future video. To know where combat matches should be made and to help with target prioritization. So here we have, this is the last slide in the deck. And then again, this is just looking at shapes. You break the shapes down into their offense and their defense, and you can see how things should match up. This helps you make better decisions overall. So anyhow, that's some of the language that I'm going to be using. Next video, we're going to go over how I break some of these units down to get these scores, because I'm going to use those in the third video. And from this point forward, when I do tactical analysis of games, I'm just going to launch right into the tactical analysis of games, and we've seen what I'm talking about and where those values come from. So anyhow, thanks for sticking with me, guys. I know it's been about 36 minutes, a little bit long of a video, but if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. I'd be happy to answer them, or maybe share how you come up with some of these numbers or your version of anything I've talked about. I love those types of discussions. They're very useful. They help us grow as players, and ultimately that's my goal. So thanks a lot. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.